Lady Death is the gripping memoir of Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the most lethal female sniper in history. Dive into the harrowing and heroic account of a young Soviet woman who became a legend during World War II with 309 confirmed kills. Let's begin. Having lived in Kiev, the Ukrainian capital, for almost 10 years, I imagined that Moscow, the capital of the USSR, would be similar. However, Moscow seemed completely different from the first moment, big, majestic, austere. The strength and might of our huge country found their perfect incarnation in Moscow. The streets and squares in the city's center were amazing in their exceptional dimensions, and the same was true of the buildings with their height and distinctive, impressive and architecture. It was not long ago, only half a year, that a great battle had been fought at the walls of Moscow. The Red Army conducted defensive engagements here from September 30th to December 5th, 1941, and went on the offensive through the winter until April 1942. The Nazis planned to take our capital without stopping to draw breath, but failed at the first assault. They then devised an operation under the code name Typhoon, intending to dismember the Soviet defensive forces with 3 strikes from their mighty tank groups, encircle and annihilate them. This plan did not come off either, even though the enemy enjoyed numerical superiority with many tanks, ordnance and aircraft. At the cost of immense losses, they managed, at the end of November and the beginning of December, to get through to the Moscow Canal in the area of Yakhroma, cross the river Nara, near Narofominsk, and approach Kashira. But then our fighting units delivered a crushing blow against the Fritzes. By December, they had liberated several population centers: Rogachev, Istra, Solnekhnogorsk, Klin, Kalinin, and Volokolamsk. I recall how in Sevastopol we waited impatiently for reports from the Moscow front. The first news of the routing of the Nazi German forces at the walls of the capital aroused tumultuous joy and gave us confidence that the German military machine could be defeated. With the Nazi assault on the main naval base of the Black Sea Fleet, which began in the morning of December 17th, the defenders of the city repelled furious attacks and reminded themselves of the need to follow the Muscovites' lead. Their example inspired us. The enemy had now retreated from the walls of the capital, but it was still a frontline environment. I saw anti-aircraft guns in public gardens and at crossroads. There was a barrage balloon team along the road. Pulling on long ropes, the soldiers were restraining a huge balloon, which resembled a prehistoric beast. Shop and residential windows were crisscrossed with broad strips of white paper. Some buildings, like the Bolshoi Theater, were covered with camouflaging colors, which distorted their dimensions and enabled them to merge with the city background. My destination was Marosaika Street and the headquarters of the All-USSR Young Communist League's Central Committee. In the spacious vestibule, some objects stood out as unusual in administrative premises: boxes of sand, spades, picks, and tongs for dealing with these incendiary bombs. They armed soldiers in the firefighting teams who kept watch on the building's roof. The sentries asked to see my documents, and I took my Young Communist League card from the breast pocket of my tunic. The secretariat of the Central Committee occupied the 4th floor. In the reception area for the first secretary, people had already assembled for the talk. The young participants in the defense of Sevastopol, like me, who had been decorated and had come to Moscow from Krasnodar at the direction of the General Staff of the North Caucasus Front. We were received by Nikolai Mikhailov, first secretary of the Young Communist League's Central Committee, a pleasant and very charming man of about 35, with brown eyes and dark hair. He congratulated us on our safe arrival in the capital, sat down with us at a long table in his fairly roomy office, and began the conversation. The first secretary conducted proceedings skillfully. The Sevastopol veterans soon felt at ease and began to talk about the recent events in the Crimean Peninsula. Mikhailov listened attentively, asked questions, made the occasional joke, and told the odd story from his young Communist League experience. Overall, the meeting proceeded in an unconstrained and friendly atmosphere. Then it was my turn to speak. I did not intend to share my memories of my own achievements, but I did want to pay due tribute to the memory of my regimental comrades who had lost their lives in the struggle against the Nazi German invaders. Lieutenant Andrei Voronin, who led our company into attack at Tatarka, the commander of the 1st Battalion, Captain Ivan Serchenko, who had distinguished himself in the bloody battles at Ishun, Junior Lieutenant Alexei Kitsenko, whom I called a sniper, and that valiant senior sergeant from the machine gun company, Chevalier of the Order of the Red Star, Nina Onilova, who died from wounds on March 7th, 1942, in a Sevastopol hospital. Mikhailov seemed to like my contribution. He was, incidentally, an experienced party worker and propagandist. Having started work at 16 as a manual laborer, he was then transferred to Moscow's Hess hammer and sickle factory, where he was employed as a roll bender operator. He then joined the Communist Party and began to write articles for the widely distributed factory newspaper. From 1931, he worked as a journalist, first for the newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda, and then for Pravda. He was nominated as first secretary of the Young Communist League in the Central Committee in 1938, and it was said that his promotion was approved by Stalin himself, who placed a high value on his organizational talents and devotion to the cause of constructing socialism in a single, separate country. The meeting concluded in a conventional way, with the presentation of valuable gifts, but Mikhailov approached me with a request. He said that my speech was grammatically correct and of a good literary standard. I had a loud voice, knew my material superbly, the events of the siege that is, and therefore he suggested that I go in 2 days' time to a meeting at the compressor factory, where I would give the young workers a similarly simple, honest, and vivid account of the way events had unfolded at Sevastopol. "I've never spoken at meetings, and I don't know how," I responded. "Don't be modest, Lyudmila. I found what you had to say very interesting." "Well, that was here, in your office." "Never mind, you'll get used to it. You have the makings of an orator. People need to be told about this awful war, only it has to be told with an optimistic note." I would not say that Mikhailov's suggestion was to my liking. However, like many of those who had survived frontline combat, I experienced feelings of guilt about those regimental mates who had perished in the hellish fire. By repeating their names over again, I somehow restored them from oblivion. They were kept alive through our memories. Within the army, things were not going too badly either. On a visit to the city commandant's office, I received coupons for dry rations and accommodation in the hostel of the People's Commissariat of Defense on Stromin Street. There, I was assigned a room of 16 square meters. I then presented myself to the new senior command in the Guards Parachute Division. I was sent to a training center as a sniper instructor. I had under me a group of 30 soldiers who had been selected from divisional detachments based on their marksmanship results in a learner's squad. I had a month to teach them the basic skills of sharpshooting, run a short course in ballistics and camouflage, and conduct practical exercises at a shooting range on the center's premises 3 times a week. Despite all this, I was completely alone in the big city of Moscow, with no relatives, friends, or acquaintances. There were only meetings with Mikhailov, which occurred fairly regularly. I had to go with him in his chauffeur-driven car to various public functions. Nikolai Alexandrovich was no longer concealing his partiality for me, but I was not altogether happy about that. I was living on the memories of my late husband. In my heart, nobody could live up to my dear, unforgettable Leonia, who was lying in the fraternal cemetery, in a city now seized by the invader. Resorting to alternative ways of expressing myself, I explained to Mikhailov that it was not appropriate for a junior lieutenant to respond to courting by a general, that is, by the first secretary of the Young Communist League Central Committee. It would be better for us to remain just friends, if he indeed wanted to maintain this friendship. Comrade Stalin's favorite was very surprised at what I said, but as subsequent events showed, his friendly attitude towards me continued and played a decisive role. In army service matters, I also kept to myself, did not flirt with anyone, did not stay behind for the usual officers' parties, and hurried back to my room in the hostel. There I indulged in my sad reflections, read and reread my favorite novel, War and Peace, and wrote letters to Udmurtia. I complained to mother about my dreadful homesickness and asked her to come to Moscow, even just for a month. I asked my elder sister, Valentina, about the health of my precious Murshik and how he was doing at school. However, Mikhailov soon brought a new element of variety into my life. It was in the first secretary's office and at his initiative that I became acquainted with Boris Andreevich Lavrenyov, a classic Soviet writer and author of novels, novellas, short stories, plays, and scripts for films shown on our country's screens before the war. Lavrenyov told me that the Red Army's Central Board of Political Propaganda, or, to be more precise, its Press and Information Department, was required to issue a pamphlet about the sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko as part of the popular series Frontline Library of Red Navy Mariners. He had undertaken to write this account and wanted to talk to me about it. Of course, I knew the name of Boris Lavrenyov, had read his interesting novella The 41st, and had even seen the film based on it, which was shot in 1927 by the director Yakov Protasanov. However, both the characters in this film, the shy factory girl, Maryutka, a soldier in a Red Army detachment, and her prisoner, the refined intellectual book lover, and Tsarist army lieutenant Govorukha Otrok, as well as the whole conflict between them, seemed a little contrived to me. The question of how to deal with an enemy trying to escape would not occupy a real rifleman more than half a minute. It would be resolved simply by pressing one's index finger on the trigger of one's rifle. Standing before me now was a man of about 50, tall, bulky, wearing round, iron-framed spectacles and a grey tweed suit. He had a fine head of grey hair. Lavrenyov looked me up and down with a fixed gaze and casually said that he saw in me an exact replica of the heroine from his novella, The 41st, the girl called Maryutka, and therefore he had a good understanding of my character. If I could answer a number of his questions now, the work would be ready in a week and submitted for printing. The pamphlet would come out in November 1942. That way, everyone would know about me, and that would be very nice. This was a red rag to a bull. In the first place, I was not a dumb factory girl, but a student at Kiev State University, and, as well as that, an officer of the Red Army. Secondly, the situations were very different. That fool of a girl had fallen for her prisoner lieutenant and, judging by the story's text, become his lover, while for me the Fritzes always remained simply targets and aroused no personal feelings. Thirdly, I took no pleasure in my name and life story becoming known to thousands of people I was not acquainted with. Fourth, I had had experience of interacting with writers and journalists, and it was negative. The esteemed Boris Andreevich could go and write about somebody else. There were many heroes today who were boldly and courageously defending the motherland. The renowned writer did not expect such a rebuff and lost his composure. Perhaps romanticized images from the Civil War had got the better of him and prevented him from viewing reality objectively. In 1921, Artillery Lieutenant Boris Sergeyev, Lavrenyov was his pseudonym, had switched from the White Volunteer Army to the Red side, fought the Basmachi Muslim rebels in the steppes beyond the Caspian Sea, and even commanded an armored train. Then, along with the writers Konstantin Trenyov and Vsevolod Ivanov, he had been the founder of a genre of heroic, romantic, revolutionary drama. But there was little of the revolutionary romantic in the events of our people's resistance to German fascism with its numerous European allies. I imagined that my acquaintance with Boris Andreevich would conclude with this. However, Lavrenyov showed persistence. He complained about my unacceptable behavior to the Red Army Central Board of Political Propaganda. They promised to take measures and took them. Strict orders were issued by the head of the board, Colonel General A. Shkerbakov, and Lavrenyov was given the telephone number of the Defense Commissariat hostel. He telephoned and I agreed to another meeting. The pamphlet, Lyudmila Pavlichenko, was duly written by B. A. Lavrenyov and came out at the end of 1942, published by the Naval Publishing House of the USSR People's Navy Commissariat. A little earlier, in August, he had offered the text to the newspaper Izvestia, which published it in a issue 209, 7895, for September 5th, 1942, under the same title. I will quote an excerpt from the beginning of this work. The morning was warm, a fine July morning. The sky above the old trees on the boulevard on Commune Square shone clear and blue, as in the Crimea. We went down a side path and sat on a bench. She took off her forage cap. The wind rustled her close-cropped, fluffy hair, which seemed as soft as that of a child. A silken lock of hair fluttered over her clear, prominent maiden's brow. Her delicate, nervous face breathed with an expression of impetuous insatiability, of a profound passion of character. It could be best summed up by Lermontov's lines. He knew the power of one idea, alone, a single, but a burning passion. It was a face that bespoke noble human integrity, a character capable only of direct action, unwilling to brook any compromises or to countenance bargains. Her dark brown eyes, with their golden spark, nestled under her narrow brows. They even seemed gloomy, but after a minute they lit up with a certain joie de vivre, with such a childlike transparency that they illuminated everything around. All right, I'll tell you what I remember. This was the most truthful part of the account. For the rest, the writer interwove separate facts from my biography with his own inventions and quotations from the great Soviet encyclopedia retelling the history of Ukraine. For example, he did not mention when and how I joined the Red Army. On the other hand, the pamphlet contained a colorful description of the bombing of Kiev, which I could not have witnessed because in June 1941 I was in Odessa. It also related a touching conversation with my mother, who had already set off by train for evacuation in Udmurtia. He devoted a lot of attention to my conflicts with teachers at number Piers 3 school in Belaya Tserkov, which never occurred, and attributed them to my character's hooligan tendencies. Apart from that, Lavrenyov incorrectly stated my starting dates at the Arsenal Factory, Kiev University, and the 2-year sniper's course, but made up something to the effect that once graduated, I had put away my diploma and forgotten about it, because I disliked the military and had dreamed all my life of studying the history of my native Ukraine. With a print run of 50,000 copies, this phantasmagoria was quickly distributed throughout the country. Lavrenyov's colleagues, the staff of central and local newspapers and magazines, subsequently used it as a source of reliable information about me when compiling their articles. I would compare this whole saga to the crooked mirror that smashed to pieces in the Hans Andersen tale, The Snow Queen, whereupon its fragments, which harmfully distorted reality, ended up in various towns and villages. However, the Red Army Central Political Authority did not only rely on eminent writers and their exotic fantasies and send to rank-and-file propaganda staff to see me as well. They said that, in addition to the pamphlet, it had been decided to issue 100,000 leaflets bearing my portrait and a call to all soldiers of the Red Army: shoot the enemy and don't miss. They composed the text of the leaflet themselves after a conversation with me of about 30 minutes. It was very simple but comprehensible, and on the whole, conveyed my thoughts and feelings accurately. Death to the German invaders. Valiant sniper Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko. A true daughter of the Leninist-Stalinist Young Communist League, she joined the Red Army as a volunteer during the first days of the Great War for the fatherland. With her rifle, Lyudmila Pavlichenko wiped out 309 Germans at Odessa and Sevastopol. This is the right and proper attitude to adopt towards the Germans. If you don't kill them at once, you'll have no end of trouble, she once wrote to her mother. Lyudmila Pavlichenko's courage and high level of military expertise are inspiring thousands of Red Army snipers, the Sestakhanovites of the front, to further feats. Soldiers of the Red Army, destroy the enemy as mercilessly as Lyudmila Pavlichenko. Shoot the enemy and don't miss. When I walked along the streets of Sevastopol, kids would always stop me and ask me earnestly, "How many did you kill yesterday?" I would give them a detailed report of my operations as a sniper. One day I had to tell them honestly that I had fired at the enemy for several days. "That's bad," said the children in one chorus. One of them, the smallest, added sternly, "That's very bad. Nazis should be killed every day." He spoke the truth, this serious little citizen of Sevastopol. Since that memorable day when the Nazi thugs burst into my country, every day of my life has been filled with one sole thought, with a single desire to kill the enemy. When I first went to war, I felt only anger at the Germans for disrupting my peaceful life, for attacking us. But what I saw later filled me with such an inextinguishable hatred that it was difficult to express it in any other terms than a bullet through a Nazi's heart. In one village retaken from the enemy, I saw the body of a 13-year-old girl. The Nazis had butchered her. That was how they demonstrated their ability to wield the bayonet. The brutes. I saw brains splattered on the wall of a house, and beside it, the body of a 3-year-old child. Germans had lived in that house. The child had played and cried, preventing these beasts from getting some rest. They did not even allow the mother to bury her child. The poor woman went out of her mind. "Hatred teaches you a lot. It taught me to kill enemies. I'm a sniper. At Odessa and Sevastopol, I annihilated 309 fascists with my sniper's rifle. Hatred sharpened my vision, and hearing made me wily and dexterous. Hatred taught me to camouflage myself and deceive the enemy, to anticipate his cunning and his traps. Hatred taught me to pursue enemy snipers patiently for days on end. It is impossible to quench the thirst for vengeance. As long as there is a single invader on our land, I will think of one thing only, killing the enemy. And I would only talk about one thing to my friends in battle and my fellow citizens. Kill the Nazi." This concludes the 19th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. What do you think of Pavlichenko's story? Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.